My name is Vivian Hart, and I was 39 when I realized loyalty meant nothing in corporate America. It started with a rooftop lunch invitation from our CEO, Mallory Grant. The setting was stunning. Glass railings overlooking the skyline, servers in black vests gliding across the floor with trays of sparkling water and seared tuna. It felt like a celebration. After all, we had just completed the beta launch of our most ambitious logistics software yet, PulseFlow, a system I had designed from the ground up over 6 exhausting but exhilarating years. Mallory smiled warmly across the table, slicing into her kale salad like everything was normal. Then, with no more weight than commenting on the weather, she said, "Vivian, we're heading in a new direction, a fresher, more innovative era." I blinked. I'm sorry?" She kept smiling. "You've been incredible, but it's time to let new voices shape the tech vision. We'll be transitioning leadership of engineering to," she paused, like she was about to announce a promotion, "to Carson Lee." The name hit me like a punch. Carson was the founder's godson, barely 30, a recent Stanford grad with a shiny resume, a confident swagger, and absolutely no experience with real-world logistics or scalable infrastructure. He shadowed me once in a teen meeting, then spent most of the time checking his smartwatch. I managed a tight smile. Of course, these things happen. But inside, I was unraveling. Not just because I was being replaced, but because I saw it coming and still held on to hope like a fool. The canceled check-ins, the skipped updates, the way my name had disappeared from the executive project briefings. I wasn't just being pushed aside, I was being erased. As we walked out of the restaurant, she handed me a folder with my NDA and transition timeline. I signed without reading. My hands were steady, but my spine felt like glass. Back at the office, my admin credentials were already downgraded. Carson's profile had been added to the internal directory with the title that used to be mine. Everyone smiled awkwardly that afternoon. Some avoided eye contact altogether. But what none of them knew was that PulseFlow wasn't just code. It wasn't just work. It was me. It was my blueprint, my vision, my nights of debugging alone under fluorescent lights when everyone else had gone home. It was built on architecture no one else fully understood, not even Carson. They had taken my title, but they had no idea how much they still needed me. And I wasn't gonna give it away. Vivian didn't go home that night. She walked for 3 hours through the grid of downtown, past late-night delivery trucks and flickering street lamps, letting the betrayal crack open inside her in slow, calculated waves. She had always been the composed one, the architect behind systems no one else could decode, but now her thoughts sharpened like broken glass. By the time she reached her apartment, something inside her had shifted. She opened her laptop and launched a console window. Her fingers moved fast, familiar, instinctual, as she accessed the server activity logs for PulseFlow. Not the front-end dashboards that Carson could see, but the core shell, where the real story lived. There it was. Access request, 10:32 p.m. Carson Lee, directory, core repo/legacy maps/blackbox framework. She leaned back in her chair. He wasn't just onboarding. he was trespassing. That folder was never indexed, not in any public repo. It held the original scripts of the Aurora engine, the dynamic routing intelligence layer that Vivian had built 5 years ago, alone, when pulse flow was nothing more than an idea sketched on whiteboards after hours. Aurora was what made the entire platform tick. Its ability to adapt to changing transport patterns, warehouse backlogs, and carrier failures in real time. And she never documented it, because she never had to. Her former CTO had once joked, "Viv, if you die, this company dies with you." It wasn't a compliment, but it was true. Vivian stared at the screen for a long time. Then she opened a hidden instance of her personal drive. Inside was EchoPath, the stripped-down, lightweight clone of Aurora that she'd been developing in her spare time, just in case. It wasn't finished, but it could be. As her machine hummed beside her, she launched 2 secure tunnels, one to her private offsite server in Wyoming, paid in crypto under an LLC she owned, the other to a secure sandbox she and her college roommate, Nisha, a cybersecurity expert, had maintained as a digital deadman switch. Vivian didn't plan to sabotage anything. She planned to remember who she was. That morning, she arrived early at the office. Carson's Tesla was already in the garage. Of course. He was in her old office, sipping an oat milk latte, gesturing at a large screen displaying architectural maps of pulse flow. Her architectural maps. "Vivienne," he greeted without turning around. "Glad you're here. I was hoping to run through the scaling plan for the Northeast cluster." She smiled politely. "Of course." Inside, she noted everything. The phrasing, the posture, the way he emphasized terms like microservice orchestration and predictive feedback loops, without really understanding how those layers interacted. He was parroting her. As the meeting wrapped up, Carson said, "I'm impressed by your groundwork. Your Aurora logic is elegant, even if a little niche. We'll probably have to simplify a few things for long-term scalability." Vivian tilted her head. "Simplify?" He grinned. "Don't worry, we're keeping your name on the launch dock." "My name?" She nearly laughed. After he left, she locked the door and opened the admin console. His credentials had already been granted super-user access to the GitLab cluster. The arrogance of it stung, but it was also useful. Vivian copied keylogs, then uploaded a forensic tracker into the system. From now on, every file Carson touched would be tagged, timestamped, and mirrored in a ghost archive only she could access. Not for revenge, for proof. Later that evening, she called Nisha. "They've given the intern my crown." There was silence on the line. Then Nisha replied, "So you're going to take it back?" "No," Vivian said. "I'm going to build a better one and make them ask me for it." Vivian wasn't alone. The next morning, she texted Jonas Lin, her most trusted colleague, and the only person left at PulseFlow who truly understood what she had built. Jonas had been with her since the earliest days of the project, a back-end wizard with an uncanny ability to translate logic into resilience. He'd seen the midnight deployments, the crisis fixes that didn't make it into the quarterly reports, the architecture maps written in marker on glass walls before any funding existed. Need to talk. Off-site. Urgent. They met at a ramen joint downtown. Unassuming, cash only, no digital trails. She handed Jonas a USB stick, then slid over a piece of paper.
A printed timestamp log showing Carson's unauthorized access to the Aurora backend from an IP address inside the executive floor. Jonas squinted at the log, then looked up slowly. "You weren't exaggerating. They're trying to ghost you while copying you." "Worse," she replied. "They're preparing to sell what they don't even understand." He nodded, then pulled out his laptop right there at the table. "Let's make sure you're not walking away empty-handed." For the next 2 weeks, they worked in shadows. Every night, after hours, Jonas and Vivian met in a shared encrypted workspace. They downloaded early versions of Aurora's source code, those tagged as pre-release and stored in a forgotten legacy directory that Vivian had always kept off the official repository. Jonas created mirrors, snapshots, and cryptographic timestamps that tied each build to the device IDs from Vivian's original machines. They uncovered signed PDF contracts from the early PulseFlow seed round, where Vivian had explicitly retained intellectual ownership of any tech predating her full-time hire. The legal breadcrumbs were all there, just buried. Meanwhile, during the day, Vivian played the part. She smiled in planning meetings, handed off project summaries to Carson, and offered training sessions on features he barely comprehended. But behind that calm, she was rebuilding something more dangerous. Aurora Echo, a new iteration of her original design, a version untethered from PulseFlow's cloud, a system that couldn't be reverse-engineered without a key. And that key was split between her and Jonas, stored in a hardware token on her keychain and in Jonas's encrypted cold storage. By now, PulseFlow had announced exciting transitions to the company. Carson was framed as the face of innovation, while Vivian's contributions were reduced to a footnote in the all-hands memo. But she didn't flinch. She was executing her version of counter-infrastructure. With Jonas's help, she also created a paper trail of fixes and interventions she had implemented over the years. Her name was attached to every emergency pull request that saved warehouse nodes during outages. Each optimization for cost routing in the Midwest, every latency reduction module in the freight pipeline, all traceable to her commits, not Carson's. In short, if Carson's team tried to move forward without her, they wouldn't just falter, they'd collapse. Jonas asked one night while reviewing logs, "What's the endgame, Viv? Are we nuking the system?" "No," she said. "We're drawing a map, one where they realize I was the terrain all along." Her voice was even, not vengeful, just aware. The final step was building chain-point ledgers, Jonas's specialty. They recorded the original authorship and time of each build using blockchain-style notarization. Each segment of Aurora Echo was now irrefutably tied to Vivian's identity, legally and digitally. But Vivian wasn't done. She uploaded a silent integrity check protocol into PulseFlow's live environment, one that would only activate if her systems were altered without proper authorization. It wouldn't break the software. It would highlight the breakage for every stakeholder to see. It was elegant, untraceable, and poetic. On a Friday morning 3 weeks into the transition, Carson gathered the leadership team for a product demo of his upcoming updates to PulseFlow's optimization engine. Vivian stood in the back of the room, next to Jonas, her arms crossed. When the first test run failed to route live warehouse data correctly, Jonas leaned over and whispered, "He patched over your predictive loop with a static fallback script." Vivian just smiled. Let them watch. By the end of the session, 2 regional managers had flagged operational anomalies. Carson blamed growing pains. Vivian said nothing. Not yet.
The official announcement landed in Clara's inbox on a gray Monday morning. "We're thrilled to share that Trevor Bellamy has been named head of engineering. His strategic vision will guide Heliotech into its next phase of innovation." Clara didn't flinch. She'd been expecting this. What the announcement didn't say was that Trevor's so-called vision was stitched together from her frameworks, her documentation, her sleepless nights. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They assumed she was done. She wasn't. 3 days later, an email from Orion Fleet Logistics, Heliotech's largest prospective client, arrived in her personal inbox. They'd been courting Orion for months. The pilot integration of Aurora Core, her optimization engine, had gone well enough to trigger a $12 million deal. The message was short. "Hi, Clara. We're ready to proceed with the final licensing. Can we schedule a live demo of Aurora Core next week?" A glimmer of amusement danced across Clara's face. She typed, "Aurora is currently not licensed for external demonstrations. Please reach out to its developer for terms. Best, Clara Wren, Independent Systems Architect." She added her consulting domain email, CC'd Jonas, and hit send. The trap had been set. The next 48 hours unfolded with surgical precision. Heliotech's internal systems began their scheduled pilot test with Orion Fleet on Thursday. At exactly 3:02 p.m., just as the live routing simulation hit 60% capacity, Aurora Core triggered its protective shell. On screen, in bright red letters, the system displayed, "Authorization key missing. Please contact developer to restore licensed access." Panic rippled through the operations floor. Trevor tried resetting the system, only to discover that every fallback he'd trusted had been designed to defer back to the original license validator, which now rejected his credentials. Aurora Echo had done its job. Meanwhile, Jonas forwarded a screenshot of the system message to Clara, along with a text. "Right on time. I almost feel bad for him." An hour later, Clara's phone rang. The CEO. His voice was tight, controlled only by legal training and corporate survival instincts. "You've interfered with a major deal. You could face consequences for this kind of sabotage." Clara remained calm. She had expected this exact conversation. "With respect," she replied, "please refer to the IP agreement I signed in 2014. Clause 6.1 specifically states that all technology developed prior to my full-time hire remains solely licensed to me. That includes the core logic of Aurora. That's a technicality." "No," Clara said coolly, "it's a protection, one your legal team signed off on when I joined because I was already years ahead of what your systems could do." Silence. She continued, "I'm not here to block progress. I'm willing to negotiate a license, along with proper recognition of authorship and a consulting contract for future updates. You think you can hold the company hostage?" "No," she said, her voice sharp now. "I'm offering a lifeline, one that your CTO just proved he can't replicate." The call ended without resolution, but Clara didn't need immediate agreement. She needed chaos to finish its job. And it did. By that evening, Clara's LinkedIn profile had received 37 recruiter messages. 4 competitors had sent meeting invites, and most surprisingly, Orion replied with, "We'd like to work with you directly. Let us know your terms." It wasn't just a crack in Heliotech's armor. It was a door swinging wide open. Jonas called that later night. The internal Slack is on fire. Carson is blaming everyone. Trevor is locked out of the repo. They tried to reverse engineer your kernel from the last push and triggered the fallback firewall. Clara exhaled. It wasn't vengeance. It was proof. They thought removing her would be seamless. They didn't realize she was the seam. The next morning, she drafted her proposal. A limited commercial license to use Aurora Core for 1 year, renewable only under advisory retainer. Ownership remained hers. Royalties applied to any resale of the tech, and her name, her authorship, was to be prominently acknowledged in all client-facing materials. She sent it to Heliotech's legal department, with the subject, Formal Terms for Continued Use of Aurora IP. And in a second email, she attached a time-stamped notarized log of every proprietary module Aurora contained, along with her original 2013 commit tags. It was undeniable. By end of day, she received a reply from Heliotech's general counsel. It read only, "We are reviewing your terms and will respond shortly." Clara leaned back in her chair. Her hand hovered over her trackpad, then opened a browser tab, checking the news. Heliotech's stock had dipped 7% by market close.
The headline hit Clara's screen like a thunderclap. Heliotech's core tech not owned by Heliotech. It started as a whisper on a niche tech blog, then exploded into the mainstream. Front page on Wired, discussed by analysts on TechCrunch Live, even dissected in a late-night segment titled When the Brain Walks Away. Within 72 hours, Orion Logistics officially withdrew from negotiations. Their public statement was carefully worded, but the subtext was clear. They no longer trusted Heliotech to deliver what it couldn't rightfully claim as its own. Then came the cascading effects. First, Innova Partners pulled out of a $6 million data integration contract. Then, Blue Bridge Rail suspended its subscription renewal to Heliotech's real-time route optimizer. And then, the final blow. A leaked investor memo warning that Heliotech's valuation might be artificially inflated due to uncertain IP ownership. Shares dropped 18% in 5 days. The CEO, the same man who once called Clara just the tech lead, issued a press release citing health and family reasons for his resignation. Trevor was quietly removed a week later. No announcement, no farewell post. His name just vanished from the website. Meanwhile, across town, in a renovated brick building that once served as a bakery, Clara stood before a clean whiteboard scribbled with expansion plans for Aurora Logistics Group. Her consultancy, her vision, her name. She didn't need the corner office with a skyline view. She had the code and the clients. Jonas was her first hire, joining as Director of Architecture. "I'm tired of defending what shouldn't need defending," he told her simply. Then came Miriam from client support, who'd been sidelined during Trevor's transition plan. Then Kyle from DevOps. Then, finally, Vanessa, her right hand from the beginning. "I told my wife I'd follow you into the fire. Turns out I just had to follow you across the street," Vanessa said with a grin. What started as a quiet rebellion became a momentum that Heliotech couldn't stop. By Q2, Aurora had secured not only Orion and Blue Bridge, but also Railspan and Axia Freight, both former Heliotech clients burned by stalled deployments and overpromises. Aurora's team moved fast, lean, precise, uncompromising. Each rollout of Aurora Core came with full transparency, client-specific customizations, and a guiding philosophy that Clara had never been allowed to fully voice at Heliotech. Build systems that grow with people, not over them. Investors took note. By fall, Ascend VC and Bridge Alpha both offered partnership deals. Clara declined equity offers. She wasn't interested in boardroom battles again. But she accepted a flexible line of credit to fuel hiring and server expansion. For the first time in a decade, she was scaling something without compromise. One afternoon, while preparing for a pitch to a European shipping firm, Clara received an email from an unexpected name. Lena Wyatt, former Chief Strategy Officer at Heliotech. I've been following Aurora's success. What you did, what you built, it was always the real engine behind Helio. I'd love to meet, not as competition, as admiration. Clara didn't respond immediately. She stared at the message, thinking about all the late nights, the polite dismissals, the meetings she had to earn her way into despite being the one person who understood the infrastructure inside and out. Recognition, it turned out, didn't always come in applause. Sometimes it arrived in resignation letters, sometimes in client migrations, and sometimes in the quiet shift of an industry realizing who the real architect had been all along. On the one-year anniversary of her departure, Clara hosted her team in the very office where it all began. No press, no pump. Just people who had been overlooked, undervalued, or underestimated. Now thriving. I didn't build Aurora just to prove them wrong, Clara said, raising her glass of cold brew in a toast. I built it to remind myself what's worth fighting for. There were no speeches from investors, no viral clips, no fancy marble lobby. But for Clara, standing in her space, surrounded by the team that believed in her before anyone else did, it felt like the loudest kind of victory.
In the quiet stillness of her new office, Clara sat by the window as dusk painted the city skyline in gold and violet. The hum of voices from her growing team filled the space behind her. The same voices that once whispered doubt in Heliotech's corridors now echoed with confidence and laughter. She wasn't looking for vindication anymore. She had already lived it. Her journey, from being quietly pushed aside to reclaiming every piece of her work, to building something even stronger, was not just about tech. It was about truth. Injustice had nearly broken her. The way her work was dismissed, the gaslighting, the erasure, all done with handshakes and corporate smiles. Rage gave her clarity. When they tried to erase her fingerprints from the very systems she'd built, she stopped explaining and started preparing. Empowerment followed, not from revenge, but from remembering her own brilliance and acting like it. Recognition came quietly, not in applause, but in the transfer of clients, the ripple in the industry, and the moment her old company collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. But the most powerful recognition didn't come from others. It came the day Clara no longer needed to hear, "You were right," because she knew. And she'd built something no one could take away from her ever again. A company that honored people, protected integrity, and believed that systems, like humans, are only as strong as the values behind them. When a young developer intern approached her and said, "I've never felt so seen at work before," Clara knew this was the legacy that mattered. Not patents, not contracts, but the freedom to be brilliant without fear. She poured herself a mug of tea, walked out to the team lounge, and joined the laughter. She didn't have to lead loudly. She just had to keep building what they told her she couldn't. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to sit down when you were ready to lead, this story is for you. Leave a comment and tell us, what was your moment of empowerment? And if you believe in quiet strength, second chances, and building back better, subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit that notification bell. Your story could be next.